I am who I am, and that's all right. I am who I am, and that's a very, very good thing. I am who I am, and that's fucking awesome. This is a reclamation of myself. This is a reclamation of my body. This is a reclamation of my heart. This is a reclamation of my soul. The soul that I was put on this planet with. This soul that has these divine intentions, that has this mission in the world to live out. But I could have never lived out my soul's mission if I continued to live in the extreme shame and pain that I cultivated around my sex, around my sexuality, around my gender, around everything I knew about my body and my wholeness that I learned through church and I learned through purity culture. I'm here today to talk to you about a couple different things. One is about this program called Pussy Church that I am putting out in the world. It is an incredible 7-week course in which you can bow down to the altar of your own body, where you can make a connection to yourself and you can actually allow your soul to come alive. It's a self-reclamation. It's turning away from self-abandonment and into yourself, into living out your truth, into living out your passion, into living out your sexuality or your asexuality in the world. The thing is, many of us grow up in cultures, in religion, in family settings where we're basically told that we're not okay. There's something about us that just isn't acceptable. That might be the way that you present your gender. That might be the fact that you have sex. Maybe you were slut shamed. Maybe it's the fact that you don't have sex. Maybe it's the fact that you want to get up on a stage and be the shining star. You sing songs everywhere you go. You love being the center of attention. There's all these different ways that our light can basically be dimmed by us continuously being told that we're not okay. I experienced this by growing up Christian. I really was a sexually curious child. I really wanted to understand sex. I wanted to know sex. I was really interested in my body. I discovered masturbation at a pretty young age, but there was no one who was communicating to me about these things. I received some books on the topic and, I asked some questions here and there, but ultimately it was sort of this silent topic. It was secret. I was actually first abused when I was 3 years old through a family friend. And it wasn't anything that one would think was a huge deal. Like, I wasn't physically raped. But what did happen in that moment was I lost my autonomy. I had no idea that I had a right to choose what other people did to my body. I had no idea that I had a right to say no, that boundaries existed and are extremely important. And this is something that I have seen church and purity culture as a whole do very, very poorly. There is a lack of information on one's own autonomy of their body, what they can do with their body, what they choose to do with their body. And there's also this lack of understanding of boundaries, especially for women who are acculturated to be nice girls, to be good girls, to say yes please, to really please everyone, to be the servants. A lot of women in Christian cultures are really taught to serve, that they're supposed to really bow down at the men in their lives, that they're really supposed to take this place of submission. But what that does is it basically sets us up for moments of getting our boundaries crossed, for moments of unwanted sexual attention, for us not being able to claim our own rights, our own autonomy in our sexuality. So what happened to me was I lost a sense that boundaries even existed. I got into a sexually abusive relationship when I was 15. It was mostly abusive in the sense that it was with a 19-year-old, and there were major power dynamics at play in that situation that weren't really ideal. And in this, I had sex because I wanted to have sex. I was curious about sex. I was super horny. I masturbated all the time. I used things like hairbrushes. I was a sexually curious child, which many, many, many people are, and that's a totally normal and actually important part of adolescence, is growing into ourself, discovering our bodies. The problem is we don't have anyone showing us how to do this or telling us what is good, what is healthy, but we don't have anyone encouraging us in our exploration and showing us safe ways to do that exploration. So I got into this relationship. I had sex. It was intensely painful. I bled everywhere and I didn't understand what was happening. I knew that sexual pleasure was very enjoyable with me and myself. I didn't understand why this dynamic was different. I also didn't understand how to exactly ask for my needs. I didn't know how to show someone else to give me sexual pleasure because I really didn't understand totally how to do it myself. I didn't know how to say, like, I don't want to have sex today, or, I'm really not feeling turned on, or can you touch my clitoris? Can you hold me? I had no idea how to ask for these things. So first of all, the relationship became a little bit imbalanced in this dynamic. And then I began going to a Baptist youth group where I was immediately told that I should not be having sex. In fact, I never really grew up with the language of being saved. I didn't even know that this was a thing, so I had no idea that I was supposed to be saved. And the Baptists informed me that I needed to be saved by Jesus Christ and that me having sex was not okay, that I would definitely go to hell for doing that. So I immediately began to dim down my sexual desire. I began to view it as this very, very bad thing. I began to view it as something that would take me to hell. I viewed it as something that was damaging to me. And so I began actually putting in boundaries and saying no to my boyfriend of the time, but not from a place of personal power. It was from a place of personal fear. Eventually, I broke up with the boyfriend. I transferred schools. I went to a small Mennonite high school, and I felt incredibly sorry for the sin that I had committed by having sex. I felt so much shame. I was one of the only girls who had sex, or one of the only girls who actually admitted of having sex. And I was completely humiliated. I felt so embarrassed and so regretful of this experience that I had. I couldn't look back at it as something that was normal, that was exploratory, that was fun, that was sometimes pleasurable, that had a lot of good and light in it. Instead, I looked back at it with deep, deep sorrow, deep regret, guilt, shame. I don't even want to say guilt. It's not guilt. It's shame. And I had no one to really talk to about this. So instead, I kept, making these testimonials of this bad person that I was and how I had turned over a new leaf and how I had grown into myself in new ways. And in the meantime, what I was doing subconsciously was I was telling myself that I was bad. And I was doing this because all the messages I was receiving from the outside world was that I was bad, that I couldn't do anything right, that there was nothing I could totally do to redeem myself. In the meantime, I was also trying to figure out my sexual identity. I knew that I had sexual attraction to girls, but I also knew this was a very, not okay thing. I didn't even know a lesbian existed in my small Iowa school. I don't think I even knew gay people existed. I just knew that this wouldn't be okay, that this wouldn't be an okay thing to explore. And I felt deep shame for this as well. And in the process, what I did was I shut down my sexuality. I basically turned the switch off. I went into a state of believing that my sexuality was bad, that my sex drive was not okay, that my interest in sexual pleasure with different kinds of persons was definitely forbidden and off limits. And internally, what I learned was that I wasn't okay. So I was constantly trying to figure out who I was up against and compared to all these other people around me who weren't me. I didn't know who I was. I was lost in who I was. And the thing that connects me to who I am, the pussy power inside of me, this body that I live in, this human animal body, I was completely shut off from it. The thing that I could tap into, this life force energy, this sexual energy that could come through me, I turned off. I basically turned off every aspect of how I could know who I was and who I am. It wasn't until my 20s that I finally became conscious of this, that I finally realized that me hiding from sexuality, me hiding from relationships, me hiding from pleasure, me never masturbating, wasn't actually fulfilling me. It actually wasn't even a part of my spiritual identity. It actually made no sense to what I understood spirituality to be. This consciousness, this oneness of the universe, this understanding of interconnection between me and all of these humans. And I began slowly recognizing that my sexuality was my life force energy, and that it could propel me into the world, into a state of deeper understanding of self, a deeper state of consciousness, and this deeper connection to the universe, to nature, to plants, to animals, to humans, to my beloved partner who I totally shut off from all sexual connection. So through this long journey of growing into self, I really discovered the healing modalities to bring my life force energy, my intimate connection to self into the forefront of my life. This didn't necessarily mean that my sex drive turned on. This didn't necessarily mean that my sex life was perfect. This didn't necessarily mean that I became this orgasmic, sensual being. But what it did mean was that I started connecting to myself. I started connecting to my body. I started connecting to who I am inside of my body. And by connecting to my body, by grounding into my body, I became more connected to this earth. I became more connected to other people, and I became intimately connected with spirit, with my understanding of that divine energy that lives within me. And this is exactly why I'm bringing Pussy Church out into the world. I feel it is high time that instead of this dogmatic bullshit around our sexuality, instead of shaming people for their sexual identity, instead of shaming people for their gender identity, instead of shaming people for having sex or not having sex, for being orgasmic or not being orgasmic, instead of living in this fear of our sexuality, instead of seeing all these relationships that are sexually disconnected, instead of seeing the frustration, the pain, the just fear inside of people and their sexual life, we need more connection to self. We need to understand the tools to bow down at the altar of our own body, of our own soul, of who we are. We need the tools to eradicate shame from inside of ourselves. Because even if we cognitively understand that this shame is not who we are, it becomes imprinted in our body. And therefore we need embodied somatic releases of this shame, a way to actually let this shame move through us so we can bring in our true identity. And so we can live that out in the world. So we can be our full and fucking shining selves, the ones that God and divinity really truly want us to be. I don't understand any religion that tells you that God wants you to be anything than who you are. And I believe the pain of this world, the gun shootings of this world, the suicide of this world, the depression and anxiety of this world is all that root cause of this intense lack of self-worth that is brought on by the shaming of this culture and the predominant religion in the Western world that basically tells us that who we are is not okay, that what we do is not okay. And so I am eradicating this. I am bringing Pussy Church into the world so we can have a sanctuary, so we can have a place to understand our intimate connection to self and how that intimate connection is divinely orchestrated, how it's a part of the whole. Pussy Church is open for all those who identify as female, those who identify as femme, those with or without pussies. Whether you're trans or you're genderqueer, you're welcome to come into Pussy Church. I have some limited scholarships available. You can check those out on my website, www.rachelhalder.com. I would love for you to join Pussy Church. I would love for you to be a part of this movement of reclamation of self, of coming home to our bodies, of bringing forth our power, and to saying no to shame. No more. I am who I am, and that is all right. In fact, that's fucking brilliant.